As you said, you've been a fellow here for 2 years. There's been a lot that's happened in the world in the last 2 years since 2017. So where are we as far as liberal democracy? Are things better, are things worse? Just kind of set the stage for us where we are right now.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. And like 2 years ago, we had like the election in the United States and we had the Brexit referendum. So in big picture-wise, if you remember 25 years ago, we had two directions. The one said was the Fukuyama thing, saying we go towards the end of history and liberal democracy will prevail. And there was Huntington at Harvard saying no, this is we're gonna see the clash of civilizations. And basically those two with their books actually coined terms that are around in the discussion ever since. And there has been sort of a consensus that Huntington is more right than Fukuyama. And looking into the last 2 years, I would actually say no, that's not the case. We see, of course, several centers of gravity nowadays, but overarchingly, we have two groups of countries. One are the democratic countries, and by that I mean constitutional countries that are based on human rights and therefore deploy the rule of law based on these human rights, and the other nations. So even though they are very nuanced and democracy in Taiwan is different than democracy in Canada, those countries are, as they call it in diplomacy, like-minded countries, and they share much more as that separates them. So I'd say this is where we stand now. We see much clearer where the world is headed, and it's gonna be, for better or worse, again, like a two-block sort of world.
And so you have an upcoming book as well. It's on identity, empathy, and democracy. I know empathy is something that you think about a lot. I think you wrote something very recently about empathy. So what do you really mean by empathy in this context when it comes to politics and democracy?
When we talk about the liberal world order, what do we actually really mean? And you can narrow that down to a few things. And very often you hear the term collaboration, and that's what the international order is about, and it's different than it used to be in democracies or republics before the Second World War. But even that, your willingness to cooperate rests upon empathy. Empathy meaning it's grounded in ratio, in reasoning, but it's also reflecting on the emotional side of things. And I guess this is this is what this world order revolves around. And if you look in the opposite would be the resentment. And the resentment is this is us and there's them, and we are better than the others. So this us versus them, which is based on resentment, cannot come to reasonable conclusions or solutions for policy problems. And that's why I think it's so important to revolve around empathy. And I give you one example, the refugee crisis in Europe. If you look at it with empathy, it's clear that we cannot in Europe take in all refugees from Africa, for instance. But it's also part of empathy to understand and try to understand why these people leave and want to be coming and heading towards Europe. And that's what I mean by empathy. And if you look into the Salvinis in Italy or the AfD in Germany or the UKIP in England, there's a total lack of this empathy and of this will of understanding what are the motivators of others.